Great, thank you, John. I appreciate that, and appreciate everybody coming and joining in. I know that this is a busy day, and excited for the chance to have a good number of people in and talking about equity in school discipline. I want to start. I know that this is sort of funny being in a virtual conference, but I do want to acknowledge place here, recognizing that at least where I am in Eugene, Oregon, and the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ali'i, which is the traditional indigenous territory and homeland of the Kalapuya peoples. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya peoples were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, Kalapuya descendants are members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, and continue to make important contributions to their communities, to the University of Oregon, and to the world. I also want to recognize, too, a few other things. Number one, I'm going to share with you some research that was funded by the National Center for Special Education Research at IES. And just want to acknowledge some really great support from some people there doing that work. I'm very, very thankful for this opportunity. And another group that I want to acknowledge is the equity work group from the Center on Pbis. We've had an equity work group for going on 7 years in identifying ways that we can enhance the cultural responsiveness of the work that we do and improve outcomes. And so you're going to see a lot of information today, some of which is stuff that I have shared, and some of it is, most of which comes from this group, and it's a really collective effort. I also want to share with you this picture to ground us in what we're doing, or this group of names. Since this work group was formed, this is an incomplete list of Black individuals who have been killed by law enforcement officers or people acting in informal law enforcement roles across the US. And the unfortunate part is that this list keeps getting longer and longer and bigger, and with no real end in sight. And I want to share with you a couple of the individuals, some of whom their lives have touched the work that we have done, and in place where we've done this work. One is Ahmaud Arbery, who you might know, have heard of, and Rayshard Brooks, who you may have heard of, both in the state of Georgia. And I'd like to encourage you all, and thanks for everybody adding into the chat. I'd like you to, at your leisure, if you feel comfortable, sharing what is your why for this work. Why did you pick this session? Why are you at this conference here? What is the thing that this is bringing to you? What made you say, I need to be at this session today, or at this conference today? So feel free to add those in. I won't comment on them, but take a look as we go throughout here. And so as we do this, I know we've got a short amount of time. We've got about an hour, but I think that's enough time for me to share with you some of the resources and talk through what we will be doing. So I'm hoping that within an hour, if I've done a good job of teaching, you'll be able to describe elements of good intervention to increase racial equity, specifically in school discipline. Identify when our implicit biases are most likely to affect our discipline decisions that we make. And then I'm going to walk you through this process of creating what's called a neutralizing routine. I'll define what that is, to use in place of a snap decision when our implicit biases are most likely to influence the discipline decisions that we make. I like to at least share one picture documenting the extent of disproportionality in school discipline that people like Jeremy Smith in there is describing. We can do better. This is what's called the out-of-school suspension risk index. This is the percent of students who have been suspended out of school at least once. This is some recent national data that's collected by the Civil Rights Data Collection process. So these are national data. It's 98% of schools in the country from the 2013-2014 school year. And what you can see here is if you take a look at it, we identify here on the left side that 5% of students, or about 1 out of every 20, has been suspended out of school at least once during this school year. But what you can see is it's not even across the board. And if you look across, you can probably very easily see that Black students are at most risk of being suspended out of school at least once. And then if you look all the way on the right side, you'll see too, students with disabilities. And if you know anything about research in terms of intersectionality, you know that Black students with disabilities are the most exposed to exclusionary discipline by an astronomical amount that doesn't even show up on this graph for you. So I think this is represents for many of you what some of your whys are for being in this session. And some of you might also be, I see a few people talking in the chat about, I'm implementing Pbis, or I'm concerned about Pbis and ways that it might perpetuate institutional oppression and systemic racism in the work. And that's something that we're really interested in as well. This is a picture here showing schools using Pbis over the last 20 years. And so this column all the way on the right side, this is just a count by year, is the 1920 school year. So the last full school year. And what you can see is there are more schools in the last school year, even with the pandemic, implementing Pbis than ever have been before. It is almost 30,000 schools across the country, almost a third of all schools, and over 15 million students being served in those systems. And there's some good reason to do that. Many of you have experienced these outcomes. So you see from rigorous research showing reduced problem behavior, increased pro-social behavior, improved social and emotional competence, academic achievement, school safety, organizational health. I should say most of these come from elementary school. And so just to kind of share with you, because people have asked, well, what does it look like in high schools? Here's some high school outcomes: reduced rates of unwanted behavior and exclusionary discipline, reduced alcohol and other drug use, improved attendance, and improved student engagement throughout. But one of the things that you're probably here to do is to think about how well these outcomes extend to all of our student groups. And so I'm going to lean on the work of Pedro Nogueira in this quotation that's really driven a lot of my work lately. But he says, if you ran a hospital but were only known for serving people who are healthy, well, you wouldn't be a very good hospital. And we can think about the same thing in terms of our schools too. If all we do is take the students who are doing all right and are going to do just fine, regardless of how I spend all of my instructional hours in the day, or regardless of how well I'm implementing evidence-based practices, or whether my curriculum has evidence supporting it, we wouldn't do particularly well. And so this picture sums up some of this tension that we have. Here we've got, you can see here, welcome home of the dogs. And then right down below it, no dogs. Okay, you might be able to see it across the closed captioning there, but there's a little sign that says no dogs on there. So we would be really worried. I mean, think of Pbis as a system or as a framework, is this approach for creating intentionally a positive school climate. And so we need to be very careful that we are not creating a positive school climate for some of our students and not others, and particularly by student groups and those who have been most marginalized, or some people say minoritized by our schools or oppressed. And so we've heard around people saying, things like PBIS only works for white kids, or it only works in suburban schools, or maybe it actually makes things worse for students of color, for Black and brown students. And that was something that was really concerning for us. So we've looked at that, the research, and we did an evaluation study looking at the extent to which that is the case. So if you remember that picture that I showed with you before with the blue bars across showing percent of students who've been suspended out of school by group, here's those same pictures. Those are the same blue bar on the left. So you see that 5% on the left side. And then what you see next to it is schools implementing PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, with adequate fidelity of implementation, meaning that they are using a validated fidelity of implementation tool that's freely available on pbis.org or pbisapps.org, and are implementing enough critical features that we would say, yep, that makes sense, that they're implementing enough of it. And so what you can see here, if you look on the left side, that 5% to the 4%, so it's a 20% difference, which is nice. But what you see is it's that 20% is not distributed evenly across. So what you see is that we would be really concerned if it was all the way on this right side over here, that we would see, that we've reduced out of school suspensions for white students, but not others. And but that's not the case. So if you look at the students who are most exposed to exclusionary discipline, in this case, Black students, what you see is a decrease. And I think what, if you're like me, you are not looking at this and high-fiving your colleagues and saying, wow, we're doing a great job. You're probably, I would assume you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, it's not making things worse. It looks like it's making things maybe a little bit better, but things are not yet good. Okay, and you might have different experiences with that, but I'm sharing my truth related to this and what I see. So I think we can do a lot more. I think we can do a lot better. So some researchers have looked at, are there parts of PBIS that are more related to disciplinary equity than others? And this is particularly related to racial disproportionality, and even more specific for Black students and between Black students and white students, or Black students and all other students. So here are the components that we see. Schools implementing these parts of PBIS with better fidelity, more complete implementation, have better racial equity in school discipline. 3 things, and these are 2 separate studies, 2 separate samples, separate fidelity of implementation tools, separate states, and so on. Number 1, schools that use data for decision-making more often have better racial equity in school discipline. Schools with greater implementation of classroom PBIS systems have more equity in school discipline. Okay, those are across 1 study. And then this last one, which I think was a little bit of a surprise to me here, was use of formal reward systems. Okay, so this is your acknowledgement systems, your ticket or token systems, whatever that is. I will say, for me, that was a little bit surprising. But then the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I thought, this could easily make sense, that we spend so much time talking about what we call the discipline gap, that we may very well also have an acknowledgement gap, meaning that we are systematically, and whether that's intentionally or unintentionally, kind of doesn't matter, not giving access to our acknowledgement systems for our Black and brown students in the school. And so I think that part is really important. We might have a discipline gap and an acknowledgement gap. One of the things that I think is really key in here is to just start thinking about what it means to be attending to positive behavior, pro-social behavior of students more than we attend to that behavior. And I see a few people talking in the chat about, like, does it have to be a formal reward system? Or, you know, are we talking about a ticket system? Are we talking about higher use of praise, behavior-specific praise? Both of those are done differently. So one of the studies talks about a formal reward system. The other one talks about high rates of acknowledgement in the classroom for positive behavior. What makes me think about this is a little bit of an age test for some of you. I don't know how many people know who Alex Haley. I'm dating myself a little bit here. You can put it in the chat if you want to act cool. Alex Haley. Oh yes, I like that. Yeah, so Alex Haley wrote Roots. He also was the ghostwriter, or maybe not totally ghostwriter, of with Malcolm X, of the autobiography of Malcolm X. I had forgotten that. I had read that and hadn't put that together. So Roots, which was a PBS miniseries, and then also autobiography of Malcolm X. But what he said, and he talked about his writing, but I think this is really critical for us and the way that we think about it. As much as I could, I tried to find the good and praise it. He said that about when he was in his writing, but I think it has so much of an application to how we interact with students. And so I see here lots of really good comments. I'm just going to pause for a second and chat here. I've got people saying, just because you use rewards doesn't mean you should, doesn't mean that means a thing that a kid gets and other kids don't. And I think that's really critical. I've been encouraging people to, when they think about their acknowledgement systems in their schools, think about students collectively earning a shared social experience or a shared activity that they get to choose, as opposed to a kid gets a thing. That's a very individualistic approach. And some people feel like, you know, that doesn't acknowledge a lot of the values of our families and communities, where they might appreciate more of a collectivist approach. And I think regardless of whether you use that lens or another lens, I think that part is absolutely critical. All right. Oh my gosh. So all of this stuff in the chat is great. I never thought about a student earning, setting off the alarm for the fire drill. That's amazing. Okay, so yeah, take a look at that in the chat anyhow. So what we have done is we looked at this information, the data, we looked at that evaluation information, we looked from our own experiences doing training, and what we came up with was a series of briefs, and you can find them on pbis.org. They're all available for you, of a 5-point approach, some are based on research, some based on our experiences, that says these are your 5 best bets for increasing, in this case, racial equity in school discipline. Some of these are going to be very familiar to you. Some of them might be somewhat new. So you can see here, number 1, collect, use, and report disaggregated discipline data, not just looking at overall patterns, but by group. I showed you a little bit of that disaggregated data earlier. Implement some kind of behavior framework, multi-tiered system that is preventive, that is instructionally focused and culturally responsive, meaning that it's flexible to meet the needs of students, their families, and the communities they come from. Use engaging academic instruction where students are actively involved, are responding, we're building on their background knowledge. This is all stuff that you should know and have available to you if you've been attending this conference or been working with this group, Oregon ORTIi. Develop policies with accountability for disciplinary equity, so it's baked into the system as opposed to baking in the status quo or oppression in the system. And then teach strategies to neutralize implicit bias. So what does that look like? Oh, great. So somebody asked a question, is number 5 for teachers? Number 5 is primarily for teachers, but hold on to that statement and we'll come back to that soon. So what this approach does, is it centers equity in our systems. And I think for many of us, I would be really uncomfortable if it's sort of like, boom, we slapped equity on it, now we've solved it, now it says it's in the middle of everything we do. That would be bad. Another thing would be if we made a different circle that's not connected to the other ones, that says equity is this thing over here. And my view of this is that equity permeates all of the 4 elements that we're used to when we're thinking about PBIS. But I want to be able to describe that for you because I want you to be able to describe this to others, how equity fits in with each of these. So number one, when we think about outcomes, we got to have high expectations for each of our students. And we do not accept structural inequities as an excuse for not reaching and teaching every student out there. Number 2, I've described this in terms of data. We want to disaggregate our data by student group. We also want to expand the type of data that we collect. So thinking about hearing, do we have measures for increasing student and family and community voice in what our PBIS systems are and what they look like? We've got some great surveys we've been using on our field testing website. If you're interested in that, let me know. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. So I'm going to expand our data, not just looking at discipline data, looking at school climate data, and then also getting some formative input into our systems. And we use that input to change the practices so that it better aligns with the values and needs of our community. And then connected to that number 5 down below, and we'll talk about this, we want to support equity educators in implementing the practices and looking at the data through equity-focused professional development. So you'll see an example of that. And you should be looking at me and you should say, that all sounds nice, but I've got a little skepticism and I want to see the data, right? Fantastic. I'm super excited about that. So just in the last few years and coming out, we've got lots of studies that are showing the effects of this equity-focused PBIS approach on discipline gaps. And so you can see a bunch of studies either just starting to come out or coming out, and I'll be able to share a little bit of that with you as we move forward. But I'll show you a really, really quick example from our great colleagues at the Wisconsin ORTIi network. Produced this analysis and then were kind enough to help us write and post it on pbis.org, so you can see this. This is a picture of that out of school suspension risk index. Remember those blue bars that I was showing you and the green bars that I was showing you before. So this is over time. And what you can see is there's a 2019-10 school year and 15-16 school year. Over the course of this time, these schools got professional development and implementation of PBIS, professional development in a school-wide early reading model, and also an institute on cultural responsiveness, on tweaking their PBIS systems to increase equity in school discipline, like we were just describing here. And a lot of this was done under the leadership of Justin Poulos, who we have managed to pull into the Northwest, and he's the director of MTSS for OSPI in the state of Washington, which is always great for us to steal people who are this brilliant. So what you can see here, if you look, the way I would describe this is look at the red line for all students. So you can see about 11% of students suspended out of school. This is elementary. And then you can see here it drops down to 4%. And what you can see is it does drop for all groups, but the thing that's really nice to see is that blue line for Black students down from 16 to 6. So not only is it a decrease, but also lowering that gap. Now, if you look for students with IEPs, so students with disabilities, we see that increased rate of out of school suspension drops in half. So it's less, which is good, but not necessarily narrowing that gap. So we really want to attend to that, and that's an area for improvement. But this also is case study information. This is sort of schools that got this, where they primed for it. And so me as a scientist, I want to be able to say, we can identify what are the evidence-based practices for doing this work. What are the parts that are fluff? What are the parts that are nice to have? What are the parts that are absolutely critical to that? So we were kind enough to, or we were lucky enough to get a grant from the Federal Department of Education that I described before, from the National Center for Special Education Research, called Project React. 3 years of funding to build and test this intervention based on the 5-point approach that I was describing to you before. And it looks like this, and I'll walk you through these parts of it. But essentially, it's specifically focused on racial equity in school discipline, guide people through a sort of a 3-step process, which is just a little bit longer than that. But school teams assess their data. We work on implementing culturally responsive behavior support practices within that Pbis framework, and then provide some training and strategies to neutralize implicit bias. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. A great team, even though I am right here presenting to you, it is really the collaboration of a lot of really bright folks and committed folks who have done this work. Some of you may know some of these people in and around. So we have just finished, we're sort of in this, we do what's this called iterative approach, where we try it out somewhere. We had some wonderful colleagues in a couple nearby school districts. I'll let them name themselves if they want to. And then we tried it out on a large scale in an entire state as part of their school improvement process. And then we implemented what's called a randomized control trial, where we pull in schools and then randomize them to condition. And so we take out some of those threats to sort of like, oh, well, these people are ready to go, and it just turned out we worked with them, and so on. So here's the way that we describe it. You can see this equity-focused image here. And we talk about that it is specifically using the Pbis framework to increase racial equity. So I'm going to walk you through ACT in here, so you can see. First thing I do is we assess data. We look at a few different ways. Number one, we look at school discipline data, so exclusionary discipline, office referrals, in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions. We also look at school climate perceptions data. We do have a school climate, a free school climate survey at pbisapps.org that you can use. It's a validated tool developed by Tamika LaSalle and others at Georgia State University. Great tool to use. And then we start looking a little bit more closely at what are some possible causes of those inequities. We want to recognize that it's possible that without attention to equity, our Pbis systems either are not implemented as well as they could be, or are perpetuating a status quo of oppression and marginalization of Black and Brown students. We also will conduct surveys and walkthroughs of the building and identify things called VDPs and EDPs. And I'll describe those, in fact, on the next slide. So a VDP is a vulnerable decision point. And that is a specific, in this case, we talk about discipline decisions. So this is a discipline decision that's more susceptible to our implicit racial biases than other situations where we might be able to act more in line with our values. And there are two elements that make a decision point vulnerable, a DP into a VDP. One is elements of the situation. So this is a little bit, the way we do this with discipline data is a little bit like the game of Clue. So it's sort of where, when, with whom, and so on. And we can find, instead of just seeing, wow, we're over-referring Black students, we can say we are over-referring Black students in the first half hour of the day in the classroom for disruption. And that is a much easier thing to do, because then all of a sudden you're putting on your teacher hat and you're saying, okay, we can solve this problem. The other part is elements of how I'm feeling when I have to make a thinking on my toes decision, right? So we call that a decision state or internal state, is kind of how you're feeling at that point. And in contrast to a VDP, we also have EDPs. And those are decisions where actually our data show that we have equity in school discipline. So something about that, and this is using that strengths-based approach, is not influenced by our implicit or explicit biases. So you can use a few different tools for you. We have, I'm lucky enough to have a group of really expert developers, trainers, customer support who build Swiss, the School-wide information system. It's something that we give away at cost. We actually lose a little bit of money off of it, and I earn $0 off of it. So that's why I can feel pretty good about it. But we basically take research right as it's hot off the press and pump that into the views that you can get into your systems. So we've just re-envisioned our equity reports to show you the pictures that you absolutely need to make those decisions. So I see somebody talking about the link to the school climate tool. I will get that to you a little bit later if you need it, and that'll be, but you can find it actually on pbisapps.org. Guess what? It's right on that link. I should have acted all cool or something like that. You'll find it there. Okay, so that was A. C, cultural responsive behavior strategies. What we do is we take those core practices of, you got it. So John just got the direct link to the survey right there. Those 5 core practices of school-wide PBIS. Define, right? We teach what we want to see. We monitor and acknowledge pro-social behavior, and that could be with or without use of any kind of reward systems that you have with that. Respond instructionally to unwanted behavior instead of excluding students, and then make decisions based on data. So this is sort of a description of how each of these operate. We try to be really clear with people because there are lots of different definitions of what cultural responsiveness is. And there's some wonderful work, you know, the Gloria Ladson Billings, that Django Paris, Geneva Gay have done in describing the breadth of this. And what we've tried to do is take all of their knowledge and say, how precisely could that fit into a PBIS approach? So I'm going to share with you 4 boxes here. And a lot of this work comes from one of my original heroes, Jerry Patterson, who's done this work and was one of the pioneers of all this, and Marion Forgach, of course, too. But what this says is, for those of you who are not familiar with these 4 boxes, essentially what it describes is a chain of behavior. And as this behavior happens, it becomes more and more and more likely to happen. So we call this a coercive cycle. What it says is, if I'm a student in the school and I have few positive interactions with adults, and I don't view school, the curriculum, the pictures around the school, the adults who I interact with, I don't view school as very relevant to my life. And I experience negative interactions, perceived slights, conflicts with adults, then I might be more likely to engage in what sometimes I used to call problem behavior. I'm more often calling it unwanted behavior because, it's what I don't want. It's subjective. So that's an important thing for me to realize. And when the student does that, the student gets sent out to the office and escapes that social interaction. So this is how this pattern can continue over time, and students and adults learn. It just gets built into these grooves in our interactions with each other, actually strengthens neural connections so that this is more likely to happen unless we make some changes. So here's how those PBIS systems. So number 1, if we define what we want to see, there's going to be fewer negative interactions. We also want to define how to respond when there are those negative interactions. We want to teach those. We want to build acknowledgement systems so that students feel welcome at school and people are attending to their positive behavior. We want to have effective strategies to respond to students that are instructional as opposed to exclusionary. And all of these fit in terms of use of data. So that's where those 5 core components fit in. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to use those 5 to create what's called a constructive cycle. We want to actually build those pathways to pro-social interactions with each other. And what this says is if we can, for students, have a positive interaction, more positive interactions, if we can change instruction so school feels more relevant to students, students will feel fewer experiences of academic failure, microaggressions, subtle acts of exclusion, and so on. But when they do, they would use desired and functional social skills that are useful for them beyond the classroom walls. And if they don't, then we would respond instructionally as opposed to sending the student to the office. So we take each of these, and instead of saying, you know, open up the manual to page 14, and then here's how you're going to do this in your classroom. Instead, what we do is we say, in each of these areas, there are different ways that you can get to this constructive cycle. And the idea is not to tell you, here is the recipe to do it, but rather say, here's a menu for how you could do it. And it fits in with those 5 things of acknowledgement, teaching, and responding. And that's in addition to examining our systems as well. We've got strategies for looking at your expectations and your teaching matrices to look for hidden biases in there. And so instead of saying you must do it this way, we're saying here are some ideas, select the ones that are going to work for your school. So here's some of the evidence that we've got. This is a school over time that we partnered with some great colleagues. One of them, Kathleen Elwood, Portland Public Schools, Lisa McCall, who some of you may know, to decrease that gap you can see here between white and Black students in terms of school discipline. And the gap is still there by the end of this work, but rates of office referrals for both students, both groups of students below the national median. So we've got some other evidence here of a single case study looking at actually coaching to increase teacher rates of praise for Black students and decrease rates of reprimands, equity in office discipline referrals. I also shared with you here when I was talking about in our phase 2, working with a whole state with schools on the turnaround list. You can see here the schools that we worked with are the ones on the left. The light gray is the year before we worked with them. The dark gray is the year that we worked with them by the end of that year. Up is better for each of these, for discipline index and for school climate. And you can see these schools were the lowest of the low in both of these areas, the lowest performing. And then you can see moving after a year of professional development up closer to the others and actually even doing better than some of the other turnaround schools. The all others are all other schools in the state. So big jumps in terms of perceived school climate from students, from families, and from staff as well. But right now we're just wrapping up this, what's called a randomized control trial. So I'm going to share with you some results there, and then I'm going to talk about one particular strategy that we found really useful. You can look at these slides later, and I think you can, if you keep clicking through, you'll find each of these slides up on the screen on the Google Drive. But these are elementary schools implementing Pbis with adequate fidelity, but still seeing those racial inequities in school discipline. So what we've done is we've gone through and provided a year of professional development, and you can see the scope and sequence on here. I'm not expecting you to read all of this right now, but just to get a sense of what this looks like. We spend a whole day with school teams looking at their data, looking at their Pbis systems, looking at the information that's in their handbook, And then a full day with staff talking about implicit bias. And you can see we use, one of the things that we use is this flip chart activity where school staff, groups, usually in grade level teams or job alikes, will work together to identify what is their VDP. So in this case, you can see here, Black students, middle of the day, physical aggression, 3rd and 5th grade in the classroom and the hallways, in particular on Mondays. And then they say, top right is, so what are some of the reasons for that? Bottom left are what are the things that we can do to prevent these challenges? Bottom right is what can we do instructionally to respond? And they take these, build them together, the team comes up with a plan that's really specific to their data. So that top left, that VDP is vulnerable decision point. That was, I should describe that. That was the elements of the situation that might make us less likely to act in line with our values and more likely to act in line with our implicit biases. And so what you can see, these are our data. 2 years ago, these schools that were randomized, this is ODR risk index. This is a percent of students who have been sent to the office. At least once, percent of Black students have been sent to the office at least once during the school year. And you can see similar, the treatment schools are the ones that they got the intervention last year, 2019, 2020. And then the wait list are ones that are getting it this year with us. And so you can see from this year of intervention, office referrals risk for Black students dropped by more than half, stayed about the same for the other districts. And you can see this also in the same, if you're familiar. If you're not and you don't like math, then just close your eyes and plug your ears and don't worry, it'll come back later for you. This is what's called the risk ratio, where you divide the risk index for one group with the others. You can see big drop there, no change for the waitlist schools. So we actually decreased office referrals for Black students and non-Black students, but for Black students even more than non-Black students. So it turns out that if you implement culturally responsive practices within PBIS, it actually helps all students too. Just kind of a nice thing to be able to say and add. So I'm going to do with the last time. Obviously, it's difficult to talk about 3 years worth of development and a year of professional development all in one shot. In 1 hour here, but I'm going to share with you a little bit more info about this last one here. I spent some time talking about data, identifying those VDPs, culturally responsive behavior strategies. So I'm going to talk about implicit bias. Some of you may have seen me talk a little bit about implicit bias in Oregon RTI conferences in the past, but some of you this might be new to you. I'm going to share with you. You all are good at teaching literacy. And take a look at this here. So if you are like most of us, you did read those words out of order in the top line. And that was because you were reading fast, because you felt like you were good at it, because it wasn't really a big deal, and you are operating on your automatic associations, right? You are fluent, you have automaticity with reading, and oops, made a mistake. So that same principle, that same phenomenon that I was just describing also applies to school discipline as well. It's something called implicit bias. All right. So when people think about implicit bias, they're usually thinking about the wrong thing. When you hear that word bias, people often think about explicit bias or overt bias, meaning like, I'm going to treat that group of people differently based on something about them. Implicit bias is a little bit different in that it is unconscious or automatic. It happens without us actively thinking about it. That doesn't make it better. It actually makes it a little bit harder for us to do. There's a separation now between intent and impact that is important for us to untangle, because our implicit biases actually are not, the research shows are not very strongly related to our explicit or overt biases. I would sort of think that, you know, before getting into this research, that like, yeah, okay, if you've got a bunch of implicit biases, you probably also have explicit biases. Or if you have really low explicit biases, you probably have really low implicit biases. And the research shows that that is not really the case. Interestingly enough, we all have some levels of implicit bias, even if we're negatively affected by that. Some interesting research that people who have the strongest age-related implicit biases, which is the strongest implicit bias in this country, meaning old, bad, young, good. People with higher implicit biases, implicit age biases, actually are more likely to die from heart attacks than those who don't. This is a prospective longitudinal study following people over time, which is pretty wild. Based on stereotypes, right? We cannot grow up in this country and many other countries, probably any country in the world, without experiencing, without being bombarded with media depictions of groups. It just happens. Beverly Daniel Tatum, who's one of the people who I read from and learned very early on. She wrote Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? She talks about bias as like smog. It's like the air that we breathe. We cannot help being affected by it, even if, you know, me driving a car today is not the cause of it, right? You can't see one person's interaction because it is just all around us. But some really interesting things to know about implicit bias is it doesn't affect all of our decisions equally. It is more likely to affect snap decisions and decisions that are ambiguous, where it's a little bit unclear which is the way to go. And so some of that, remember I showed you that sign before, some of that automaticity is popping up. So we gotta have something to counter that. And I love this quotation. And if you're not a high school person, you know, I mean, if you're not teaching young kids, forgive me, but I think it fits with everybody. It's this quote here: when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it is our job to share our calm, not to join their chaos. In other words, we should not fight fire with fire. It turns out that there's an evidence-based practice for fighting fire, and it's water, not fire. I know, who'd have thunk you'd learn about fire safety in a lesson like this. So let me share with you, remember those boxes I was showing you before, that coercive cycle? What I'm gonna share with you is not student behavior, it's actually my behavior as a teacher in the classroom. I've spent way more time in this as my life in a couple decades ago. All right, so what this says is that when I don't have a lot of positive interactions with students and I'm tired, and a student makes loud complaints about the work, which could be viewed as constructive feedback about my level of differentiation of instruction, or as defiance, right? And if it's defiance, then my gut response, my snap decision is to send a student to the office, right? Office with your head. Student gets out of class, I don't have to deal with that student for a little while, boom, okay? Turns out that doesn't work very well unless I really want to increase the level of unwanted behavior in my classroom, because I've just signaled to that student and everybody what to do to get out of my classroom, right? And that student is now embarrassed, not engaged in their instruction, ticked off, I'm ticked off, nobody's actually winning, even though it feels like it. So what we want to do is to create a little bit of space in between the student behavior and my response to it, okay? So we just create a little space in there. And we say, catch ourselves, and we say, hey, Is this one of those vulnerable decision points that we talked about in our professional development session, right? That our data show? You know, is this defiance in the first 30 minutes of the school day? Is this physical aggression in the hallways? Whatever it is for that particular school, you lay that out there. If that's the case, boom, I come up with an alternative response that I'm going to use instead of sending the student to the office. Okay, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to break that chain of excluding students. And so a point that comes up in the chat when we're talking about vicarious trauma, how does this play in for teachers? Absolutely. This is part of what we do when we talk about a good trauma-informed instruction, is being able to respond to student behavior in ways that line up with our values and not in ways that go against our values. And so sometimes that means we got to catch ourselves. That is what we're talking about here. Okay, and a great comment here. It's okay, I won't say who it is, but sent a message in the virtual learning session. This is the equivalent of people removing students for not participating. Yes, and I'm even gonna go farther from this. And I think, you know, I've learned from some of my friends and colleagues, and especially in the Bethel School District, that sometimes the things that we think are like quick and like, I'm just going to like signal to you that your behavior is not okay, and then you're going to come back in. So even something like putting a student on mute, you know, if they're talking out or something like that, that is a very public act. Okay, that is something that every other kid in the room sees. And yeah, is it as bad as kicking a student out of the class and they can't come back? No, it's not as bad as that. But is it somewhere on that line of exclusion? Yeah, absolutely. So how can we do that? How can we do that instead? How can we be a little bit, act more in line with our values? And that's why we use this thing called a neutralizing routine. So a neutralizing routine is, in our nerdy definition, is an instructional response to unwanted behavior that we use as a replacement behavior of our harsh response during VDPs. And so if our VDP says we are more likely to send a student out of the room if they are Black and they are using volume that's higher than I am used to or that I grew up with or whatever, that's where the race and culture element comes into it. So what a neutralizing routine does is it helps us stop as adults before we respond so that we can proceed in a way that lines up with our values, but also increases the behavior we want to see and decreases the behavior that we don't want to see. We have some good evidence, some from us and then some from some colleagues, Clay Cook, looking at implementing this and showing that at least as part of a package can work well, not only to decrease unwanted behavior, but also decrease our use of exclusions for Black students. So here's some things that we think about for a critical feature. Neutralizing routines remind me a lot of school-wide expectations in that there is not one way that you have to do it, but instead some key things to attend to when you pick yours. And so these are what the research says. Some of this research actually comes from social psychology. It doesn't always come from education. But they said there are 5 things that we think make a neutralizing routine good. Number 1, it's an if-then statement. So if the student does this, I'm going to respond with that, right? 2 is it's brief. It's not a long drawn-out thing. Doesn't stop instruction. We got clear steps. I think it's actually going to work. And it does something to slow down the decision-making, right? Interrupts that chain of events. So some important things when we talk about what something is, we also want to provide non-examples of what it is not. So a neutralizing routine is not something that is done to us, meaning having a privilege taken away, being put on mute, and so on. It is not a gentler way to exclude students, like a cross-grade timeout or something like that. And it's not a long procedure. We're not going to stop class for a restorative circle that, we're not going to say like, you've disrupted instruction for the last minute, so we're all going to spend the next 20 minutes about how you've wasted our time. Not a great use of instructional moment for the whole class. Here's another way that you could do this. Or sending somebody outside to run a lap or something like that. So the ways that we could tweak that is we got to make it an action that we can do. And I'll describe some of these so it's a little bit more clear. Keep students in instruction, make it brief, back and into the game. This is a quick response that we have. So the way that we do this, connected just like I was describing before, see unwanted behavior, you stop and you say, hey, is this a VDP? Either based on the situation or based on how I'm feeling right now. And then if so, I use this alternative response that I have practiced. So what I'm going to share with you is I'm going to share with you a few examples of neutralizing routines. And the beauty is you're going to look at this and you're going to be like 9 out of 10 of those are like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But then one of them is like, oh, maybe I think I could maybe do that. So that's the one that you could try. So here are a few examples. These are ones that either we came up with, that we use with our children, that I use with my kids, or also ones that participants have shared with us over the years as well. So it always says that if then, right? When I see VDP, so this is like when I see defiance in the hallway or probably disruption in the hallway, three bins. One is to slow things down, delay the decision until I can be calm and clear in my thinking. So maybe that's the see me after class or see me at the next break and I do instruction. I might do the funky move where I ask the student to reflect on their own behavior. And at the same time, like I'm like, reflecting that way. Or I ask myself, am I acting in line with my values right now? Am I in a space where I can be the best teacher I need to be with this student? Another thing that you can do is you can reframe your situation. So a few examples of what that looks like. I won't go into great detail on each of these, but I do like this last one, and it's kind of interesting. This is one that a participant shared with me. She said, what I do is instead of thinking of this student as a total jerk who's being willfully defiant, I just respond as if the student was physically injured, and that totally changes how I respond. So instead of being like, oh, you're just trying to get on my nerves. Oh my God, that's it. It's more like, oh my gosh, are you okay? What happened? What do you need? How can I help you? And it's that little switch that could do it. And then another category is the take care of yourself. So this could be, you might have a mindfulness practice you might have a social emotional learning skill that you're teaching your students. And maybe it's one that you teach to them and they can do it amazing at, social skills class at, Thursday afternoon from 1 to 1:30, but never after that. All possible. This is the way to actually make it work, is you might have a school-wide strategy to use. So I'm going to share with you one of them. This one's called try. It is one that we sort of say, give us an example. A lot of schools use it, but not everybody does. I think they need to create something that works for them. So try is a TLA, just a 3-letter acronym. Stands for take a deep breath, reflect on your emotions, and then act in the youth's best interest, okay? And a lot of times it is in this pairing, coaching, co-regulation language. Let's try that again. Let's try it a different way. Let's try how we do it at school. Let's take a deep breath together, okay? And the beauty of this is you can have it for adults, but you can also have it for your students. And so sometimes we simplify the language a little bit. So try for students, take 3 deep breaths. For some reason, the adults believe that the children need to breathe more. I don't know if that's true or not, but hey, reflect on your feelings. So we've kind of brought down the vocabulary level, and then you got this. Keep going. You can try again. And so for those of you who have that social emotional theme of maybe you're talking about a growth mindset or something like that, then this try fits in well with that. So, so you can see how this work, instead of being like, oh, here's a PBIS philosophy and here's an SEL philosophy, and there's no way that these could work together. That's ridiculous, right? That's either or thinking, and that's not particularly helpful. Sorry, I don't know, soapbox there for a moment. So instead, we can say actually how these things actually work together as opposed to separate. Here's a little early childhood example for those of you who might be using Tucker the turtle, right? Tucker the turtle tucks back into his shell for a moment and then comes back when they are ready to solve a problem. So given that, some of you might already have a neutralizing routine, and if you'd like to, you can share it in chat. A lot of times people say, oh, I have a neutralizing routine. I don't use it at school. I use it with my family. I use it with my significant other. I use it with my kids or whatever. So if you want to, if you think like you've got something that you actually like recognize like, oh yeah, that is actually something that I use, then go for it. All right, stop and name your feeling. Yeah, I like that. We used to use this one called stop, that was stop and then take a deep breath, observe your emotions, and then proceed positively. What we found though was that when adults were using it with students, they would go stop, right? It's like the exact opposite of what we would do to co-regulate and help students downregulate. So there you go. Oh, look at that. So Elizabeth saying, I take a deep breath and then check my cues of how that changes. So once we've identified that, then we, Drew sharing that info. I have to say, Drew Lawrence, who's in here, has been such a teacher to me in this work and what we've been doing. So I'm just so grateful that you're here. So here's some things that we help people to be able to do it, because you got to recognize this is like a split-second decision. So if you've ever worked with a student or an adult who has a short trigger response, like it's like boom, really fast, you know that you don't always teach somebody and they go, oh yeah, this is perfect. So what we do instead is we say, okay, we can encourage people to do it. We can put visual prompts around. We oftentimes will do these bracelets, so they pop up on people's bodies, so it helps you remember it. We actually do it for adults and for the students. So you see lots of good examples. Some of you are integrating with other things, so you've got zones of regulation or Kelso, any of those that fit in with it, great. I would say if you've got something that you're using and encouraging people to use, please don't add some new thing to the mix. Just figure out if it's something that people like and do, then great. Last thing, if you want, take a look at some resources that we've built, including videos, worksheets, a lesson plan for students. And so you can just go to bit.ly and then neutralizing routine, and you can grab that. I don't remember, John, if I put this into the handouts there, but if not, you can just pull this right off of the slides and you should be able to get it. So, does this solve everything related to equity and school discipline? Not even close, right? But does it give people that next step for what to do? Absolutely. So this is my time here. I am happy to stick around for a few questions, but I also really, full disclosure, I want to go to the next session that Dr. Nicole Holland-Sims is doing. So I'll stick around afterwards for a few minutes. I don't know if John will allow us to keep it open, but if you got questions, I'm super happy to answer them. I thank you for your time. Please recognize that the thing that you are not allowed to do is take this, save it, and not do anything. And you can even do the exact opposite of what I'm recommending you do, but please do something. So feel free to ask. I see lots of familiar faces around. Thank you. Somebody had asked before, I think it was Amber had asked before, how do I get those surveys? There are 2 different surveys. There are school climate surveys, which John put that link in there. So you go to pbisapps.org. If you want, we also have a student, a stakeholder input and satisfaction survey. And that is more of a formative input into students and families and staff experience with the PBIS systems with some recommendations. If you're interested in that, let me know, and I am happy to, you can just email me and I can get you access to that. It's in our field testing website, so you just connect with your PBIS assessment coordinator. Okay, I'm going to answer one question here. And Nina, have you done a student survey for COVID?
Actually, I'm so sorry. John had to leave to go start the next session, and I actually have to end this session also because we're having some technical difficulties in another one. And if I leave, the session ends. So,
okay, so you can leave.
All right, but thank you very much. John wanted me to thank you as well. Everyone, take a moment, use your facilities, and then we'll see you at the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Take care.